By 3 a.m., every workplace becomes the same place. The hospital, the warehouse, the gas station, the office building. It all turns into fluorescent lights, burnt coffee, and that dead silence that only exists when everyone else is asleep. That's what nobody tells you about night shift. It doesn't just make you tired, it makes everything feel slightly off. Hallways look longer, doors open too smoothly. Your reflection in dark glass can make your heart jump. I worked overnight maintenance in a nursing home, midnight to 8 a.m. Mostly boring stuff, jammed doors, clogged sinks, broken lights, false alarms. By 2 a.m., the building always settled into this strange half-silence, a TV murmuring in one room, sneakers squeaking somewhere down the hall, ice dropping in a machine. You learned the building's sounds. That's how you knew when something sounded wrong. The second floor west wing had been empty for weeks during renovations. No residents, no staff, most of the lights off. I only went up there if someone called about a leak or the thermostat. At 2:43 a.m., the front desk radioed me. "Can you check second west?" "What happened?" Pause. Motion alarm. I laughed. "On the empty floor?" Another pause. "Yeah, just go look." Something in her voice got under my skin. I took the service elevator up with my flashlight. When the doors opened, the hallway was dim and yellow, half the ceiling panels missing, plastic sheeting over the nurse's station. It smelled like drywall dust. I keyed my radio. "Second west, I'm here." No answer, just static. Then the motion sensor at the far end of the corridor clicked and one bank of lights came on, then another, like something was walking away from me, just far enough ahead to keep triggering them. I stopped. Silence. I told myself it was faulty wiring. Then I heard a call bell. One sharp ding. Room 214. That room had been empty for almost a month. I stood there with my flashlight and radio, embarrassed by how hard my heart was pounding. That's the worst part of being scared at work. You feel stupid on top of terrified. So I kept going. The closer I got to 214, the colder the hallway felt. Not freezing, just wrong. Like stepping past an open freezer door. The room door was cracked open. I knew it had been closed earlier. I pushed it wider and shined my light inside. Empty bed, stripped mattress, one chair in the corner. Plastic over the cabinets, dust on everything. Nobody there. Behind me, another call bell dinged. Room 216. I spun so fast my shoulder hit the frame. The hallway was empty, but the red light above 216 was glowing. I walked toward it. Before I got there, the bell stopped. Then 218 rang, then 220. One after another down the hall. Not random, in order. Like something was moving room to room ahead of me, pressing each button and waiting for me to follow. Then every bell stopped at once. The hallway went dead silent. From behind the plastic at the nurse's station, I heard someone whisper, "Help me." Weak, old, breathless, clear as day. I froze. Logic tried to save me. Maybe a TV downstairs. Maybe sound through the vents. Maybe a resident had wandered up. Then it whispered again, closer. "Please." The plastic sheeting moved, just a little, like a hand pressed from the other side. I actually said out loud, No. Then I turned and walked back toward the elevator, fast but not running, because running would mean I believed it was real. Behind me, I heard rubber soles squeak on the linoleum. One step, then another, slow, following me. I looked back. Nobody. But the footsteps kept coming. Squeak, 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 exactly like a nurse doing rounds. I hit the elevator button hard. Nothing. I hit it again. Behind me, the footsteps stopped. Then the hallway lights shut off all at once. Not flickered. Off. I was standing in near darkness with only my flashlight, and the beam shook enough to catch the reflection in the elevator doors. Mine. And behind mine, over my left shoulder, was another figure. Tall, thin, standing so close it should have been touching me. I whipped around. Nothing. When I looked back, the reflection was gone. The elevator arrived with a soft ding so normal it almost made me cry. I stepped inside and stared through the narrowing gap as the doors closed. Just before they sealed, I saw someone step out of room 214. Not clearly, no face, just a pale shape in a hospital gown, one hand on the frame, leaning out to watch me leave. I went straight to the front desk. The receptionist took one look at me and said, "You saw it too." She turned a monitor toward me. Grainy black and white footage from Second West. It showed me standing at the elevator, pressing the button over and over, completely alone. "Back it up," I said. She did. There I was in the hallway again. Only now every empty room door was open, and in each doorway there was someone standing there, perfectly still, watching me. The video glitched before the shapes got clear. 1 second they were there, the next the hall was empty again. I quit 2 weeks later. Not that night. I finished the shift because bills still exist after the worst thing you've ever seen. Morning staff still clocks and joking about traffic while you stand there wondering if your mind broke at 3 a.m. That's what makes it worse, not the fear, the normality after. Nobody found an intruder. Nobody explained the call bells. Management blamed old wiring. The receptionist moved to day shift and never talked about it again. A month later, I came back to pick up my last check. One of the nurses asked why I'd really quit. I told her I just couldn't do nights anymore. She looked at me for a second and said, "Probably smart." Then, casual as anything, she asked, "Did it look like patients to you too?" I never answered. I worked the night shift at a roadside hotel for almost a year, and I can tell you something nobody really understands unless they've done it. After about 2 a.m., the whole building changes. During the day, a hotel feels temporary. People rolling suitcases across the lobby, kids asking for extra towels, business travelers checking their watches, someone always coming or going. At night, it stops being a business and starts feeling like a giant, sleeping house full of strangers. Every sound stands out. The ice machine dropping cubes on the 3rd floor, pipes ticking in the walls, elevator cables humming, a TV left on too loud in some room you can't identify. You get used to those sounds. That's how you know when you hear one you shouldn't. I worked alone most nights from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. My manager called it quiet work, which was true if you ignored the drunk guests, the broken key cards, and the constant low-grade paranoia that comes from being the only employee awake in a building full of people you don't know. Most nights followed the same pattern. Rush of late check-ins until midnight, dead stretch from 1 to 4, then early airport guests stumbling down around 5 looking half alive and asking for coffee. The dead stretch was the worst. That was when the lobby felt too big, and the security cameras became more interesting than whatever show I had playing silently on my phone. The hotel itself wasn't fancy. 3 floors, long carpeted hallways, a small breakfast area, 2 side entrances, and a back stairwell that opened near the laundry room. The kind of place where everything looked clean until you really looked at it. Beige walls, framed prints of local landmarks, lamps that gave off more yellow than light. There was one part of the job I hated, walking the halls when a guest complained about noise. It always felt awkward, like you were sneaking through someone else's house. But around 3 a.m. one Tuesday, I got a call from room 214. The man sounded irritated more than angry. "Someone's walking around above me," he said, "back and forth for the last 20 minutes. I pulled up the room map on the computer. Room 214 was on the 2nd floor. Above him was 314. Unoccupied. I checked again because I thought maybe I'd clicked the wrong room. But no, 314 was vacant. Had been all day. I apologized, told him I'd check it out, and grabbed the master key and my flashlight from under the desk. The flashlight part sounds dramatic, but half the hallway lights upstairs had a delay sensor, and the corners got dim at night. The elevator ride up felt longer than usual. I remember hearing that faint rattle in the ceiling panel above me and thinking I needed to write it up for maintenance. Normal thought, useful thought, the kind of thought you cling to when you don't want your mind wandering. When the elevator opened on the 3rd floor, the hallway was empty and still. The carpet muffled everything. No TV noise, no doors closing, no voices. Just that stale, over-air-conditioned smell hotels get after midnight. I stood there listening. Nothing. Then, from farther down the hall, I heard it. A footstep, slow, heavy enough to hear through carpet somehow. Then another, a steady pace, back and forth, coming from the section where room 314 was. I remember actually feeling annoyed for half a second because I assumed someone had been checked into the room by mistake and not entered into the system. That seemed easier to believe than anything else. I walked down the hall, and the footsteps stopped, just stopped completely. I stood outside 314 and listened with my ear near the door. No TV, no movement, no voices. I knocked twice and called out in my customer service voice. "Front desk?" Nothing. I used the master key. The lock flashed green, and the door opened into total darkness. The room was empty, not just quiet, empty in that obvious hotel room way. Bed still perfectly made, bathroom light off, curtains drawn, no luggage, no shoes by the bed, no charger plugged in, nobody hiding behind the bathroom door, nobody in the closet. I checked because at that point I was irritated enough to want a simple explanation. There wasn't one. I stepped back into the hallway, and before I could even pull the door shut, I heard the footsteps again. This time they were directly above me. For a second my brain couldn't make sense of it because there was no guest floor above the 3rd, just the roof and a locked maintenance access area. I looked up, like that would somehow help. The footsteps moved overhead from left to right, slow, measured, like someone pacing the length of the hall on the ceiling. I actually laughed once under my breath, not because it was funny, because sometimes when you're scared and alone, your body picks the wrong reaction. I went to the stairwell instead of the elevator. I don't know why. Maybe because it felt more official, like I was doing a real inspection. The door to the upper access level was supposed to stay locked. Only maintenance had the regular key, but the master opened it too. When I pushed the door open, a wave of cold air hit me. Not outdoor winter air, just cold, stale air that smelled like dust and wet concrete. My flashlight beam landed on pipes, insulation, and a narrow service corridor that ran above the third-floor rooms. Not a place guests could access, not a place anyone would want to be standing around in at 3 a.m. And yet I could hear movement. Not footsteps now, more like something dragging lightly across the floor. I called out, "Hello?" The sound stopped. I took maybe 3 steps inside. My flashlight caught the far wall and then swung across a row of metal units and stopped on what I thought was a person. Tall. Standing at the end of the corridor, perfectly still. I froze so hard it felt like my knees locked. I pointed the light directly at it, and for a second I couldn't understand what I was seeing. It looked like a person in a pale robe or gown, hair hanging down over the face, one arm bent strangely at the side. Then my hand shook, the beam shifted, and I realized it was a plastic-covered laundry cart someone had stored up there. I've never felt relief hit that hard in my life. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I actually swore at myself under my breath and took a breath that felt shaky and humiliating. "See," I thought, "you're tired, you're alone. You scared yourself." Then something moved behind the cart. Not the cart itself, behind it. A shape crossing the gap between 2 water heaters. Fast. Silent. I snapped the flashlight over and caught nothing. At that exact moment, my radio at my hip went off so suddenly I nearly dropped it. A burst of static. Then the desk phone ringing. Not through the radio, obviously. Downstairs. Faint, but unmistakable, echoing up through the stairwell door I'd left cracked open. Someone was calling the front desk. For one insane second I considered staying where I was, proving to myself I hadn't seen anything. But the phone kept ringing, and the sound of it felt like a lifeline. I backed out of that corridor without turning my back fully and shut the access door harder than I meant to. By the time I got downstairs, the phone had stopped. The lobby looked exactly the same as I'd left it. Lamps glowing, fake ficus in the corner, bowl of mints at the desk, the kind of normal that almost makes you angrier after something scares you. The security monitor over the desk cycled through the camera feeds automatically. Parking lot, side entrance, breakfast area, 3rd floor hall. I hit the button to bring up the 3rd floor hall full screen. The hallway was empty. Then, at the far end near room 314, something passed in front of the camera. Not clearly. More like the image dimmed around a shape that should have reflected light but didn't. It moved from one side of the hall to the other and disappeared near the ice machine alcove. I replayed it twice, telling myself it was compression, bad lighting, some camera artifact. Then room 214 called again. I picked up immediately. Before I could say anything, the man in 214 said, very quietly now, "Someone just knocked on my door." I felt my stomach drop. "Did you open it?" I asked. "No." "Can you look through the peephole?" There was a pause long enough for me to hear him breathing. Then he said, "There's nobody here." I told him to keep the door locked and call me if he heard anything else. He asked if I had found the guest upstairs. I said, "I'm checking," which was true in the loosest possible sense. I watched the monitor for another minute. Nothing. Then the side door alarm chirped. One of the back exits had opened. I switched cameras. The back hallway camera showed the laundry room corridor and the metal door that led outside. The door was shut. No person in frame. But the alarm panel insisted it had just opened and closed. And standing on the floor in front of that door, where there had been nothing a second earlier, was a wet line of footprints. Not many, maybe 6 or 7, bare feet, leading away from the door and out of frame toward the stairwell. I didn't go looking. I know that sounds weak, but there's a point where self-respect gives way to survival instinct. I locked the office door behind the desk, called my manager, and told him the alarm system was malfunctioning and I needed him to come in early. I didn't tell him the real reason because saying it out loud would have made it real in a different way. Nothing else happened before sunrise. That was almost worse. At 6:15, the breakfast attendant came in, cheerful and sleepy, and started setting out bagels while I sat there feeling like I'd been awake for 3 days. The wet footprints were gone by then. The back hall was dry. The camera clip from the 3rd floor wouldn't replay properly. It kept freezing right before the shape crossed the hall. My manager laughed off the alarms and said old buildings do weird things at night. I quit a week later. I told everyone it was the schedule, which was partly true. Night shift messes with your nerves. It makes you question what you hear, what you see, what your own reflection is doing in the lobby glass. But that wasn't the real reason. The real reason was what happened on my second to last shift. I was training the guy replacing me, showing him how to run the audit and reset the breakfast lights, when room 214 checked in again. Same guest, same last name. When he handed over his card, he looked at me for a second and said, "You're the one who was here last time." I said, "Yeah." He nodded toward the elevator and asked completely casually, "Did they ever figure out who was pacing above me?" I opened my mouth to give him some normal answer. Before I could, he said, "I only asked because around 4 that morning, someone knocked on my door again." He smiled like he was telling me a weird travel story. Then he said, "When I looked through the peephole, there was a woman standing there. She was very tall, and I couldn't see her face because her hair was wet." I didn't answer. I just handed him his key cards and watched him get into the elevator. I never worked another night shift after that.